Welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you for participating this afternoon. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today's webinar is based on NTD reporting for state DOTs report year 2020. We are pleased to have as our presenters today Melissa Conte and Eric Chadwell. Melissa Conte joined the NTD team in 2015. She is a graduate of James Madison University and currently works as a senior validation analyst across urban and rural reporting modules of the National Transit Database. Eric Chadwell joined the NTD team in 2016. He is a graduate of James Madison University and currently serves as a validation analyst for the rural reporting mode of the National Transit Database. Today's session will consist of the presentation of the material with, I believe, Q&A throughout, as long as you type your question in the Q&A box. I believe Eric and or Melissa, whoever's not speaking, will attempt to answer the questions. If not, I will moderate them out loud when we break for questions. If you don't see your Q&A box, you can enable it by clicking on the menu bar that should say Q&A box, and that should pop out that window for you on those Zoom controls. If you do not have a copy of the presentation handout, which was emailed to you, as soon as we get started, and I can paste that in the chat box so that you can download the handouts. I think that covers all of our housekeeping. Melissa, take it away.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today for the 2020 report year state DOT training presentation. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to use that chat feature as Lori just mentioned. Eric will be watching it while I speak and vice versa towards the end of the presentation. If there's anything that's specific to your agency or anything we want to follow up with you on later, we'll let you know that as we go through the presentation. All right, here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require technical assistance while completing your report or accessing our published data products, you can feel free to call or email our help desk line between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I always suggest reaching out to your assigned analyst first, and if it's after hours, then you can reach out to the help desk if applicable. Like Lori mentioned, my name is Melissa Conte, and I'm joined here today by Eric Chadwell, who will also be presenting the latter half of this presentation. Our contact information is listed here if you have any questions about this presentation, or you can also contact your assigned analyst. All right, here's the agenda for this afternoon. First, we'll do a quick overview of the NTD. Then we'll move on to some important changes and clarifications for the 2020 report year. Then we will review the fundamentals of NTD reporting. We will discuss how to get started in the NTD 2.0 reporting system, briefly review some interface changes, and then we'll move on to the kickoff and completing the annual report. We will also review in this section some common reporting challenges, and then lastly, we will move on to how to submit your report and the closeout and validation process. Okay, first is a quick overview of the National Transit Database, or NTD. So what is the National Transit Database? The NTD was established to be the nation's primary source of information and statistics on all public transit modes in the U.S. It's a source of data performance measurement for benchmarking as well as research. Recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds report to the NTD. Subrecipients of State 5311 funds report data through their state's report. These subrecipients may include those who have received funding in the past and are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, or it may include those that wish to receive funding in the future and report voluntarily. 5311 recipients and subrecipients are required to report due to the grant requirements as stated here on the slide from the legislation. Data from the NTD is used for several things. Some examples include performance benchmarking, as mentioned, research and statistic programs, formula apportionments for funding, and reports for Congress, as seen here on the slides. NTD data is due on the following dates, either October 31st, January 31st, or April 30th, depending on your agency's fiscal year end date. These deadlines are closely monitored by your analyst, and if you have any questions on when to report or you're unsure, you can always reach out to your analyst. Okay, so now we're going to cover some changes and clarifications for the 2020 report year that may affect your report. First, we will discuss the federal apportionment for the 2021 fiscal year and the 2022 fiscal year and how that relates to COVID-19. For fiscal year 2021, FTA will use the 2019 report year data as normal to apportion the funds since COVID-19 did not affect data in the 2019 fiscal year. For the fiscal year 2022 apportionment, since this was affected by COVID-19, FTA will automatically hold all agencies harmless due to that being affected by COVID-19. You do not need to request to be held harmless individually. This will automatically be implemented, and FTA will use the data from the 2019 report year in the apportionment for the fiscal year 2022 unless your agency requests otherwise. Okay, so with COVID-19 as well, we understand many agencies may have been providing additional services such as emergency services or non-passenger services like meal delivery. Emergency services or response services to a natural disaster, or in this case, a pandemic, do not meet the FTA definition for public transportation and are not reportable. Non-passenger services are also not reportable since they do not meet that definition for public transportation. So these two types of services should not be included in your NTD report. In the event that your agency received the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act funds or CARES Act funding, you will need to report these as a separate item on your reduced reporting or RR20 form. There will be a new line under the federal funding section to report these funds. For any fleets that were added to your agency's transit services during the year, the seating capacity should be reported as the normal operating standards pre-COVID-19. You should not update any seating capacities to reflect temporary changes in capacity due to the pandemic. Any Medicaid funding of non-emergency medical or NEMT service should be reported as an organization paid fare. Previously, these funds would have been reported under state funds or other federal funds, depending on the original source. But moving forward for 2020, these should be reported as organization paid fares. For financial reporting, agencies are required to report the final source used to pay for the cost of an expense. You should not report the interim financing mechanism, typically local funds, that you may use. In the event that your agency has pre-award authority for an FTA grant, you should report the expenses as that particular FTA grant, even if the reimbursement has not yet been completed. New for report year 2020, there are two new types of service in the NTD. There are the existing types of directly operated, or DO service, and purchase transportation general, PT, and the two new types of service are purchase transportation taxi, or TX, and purchase transportation network company, or TN. Purchase transportation types of service are now determined by the type of entity under contract. So a clarification for transportation network companies, or TNCs. If you have agencies reporting to the NTD and contracting with a TNC or an on-demand service, and the service is considered to be public transit, you must include that information in your NTD report. As mentioned on the slide here, the contract between your agency and the TNC must meet the criteria for purchase transportation as defined in the NTD policy manual. We will review what constitutes public transit in a couple minutes. The TN, or Transportation Network Company type of service, is a service that's provided by a TNC on behalf of a public transportation agency. The service must meet requirements for purchase transportation and be open to the public. Agencies reporting this mode will be asked to complete a questionnaire to validate these requirements. The TX, or taxi type of service, is a purchase transportation service provided by a taxi company. This was previously captured under the mode and type of service of DTPT, and now moving forward in 2020 would be captured as DR, for demand response, TX, which signifies that purchase transportation taxi type of service. The NTD system will automatically change any existing DTPT modes to the DRTX type for report year 2020. Demand response taxi services are operated by a commercial taxi company for a public transportation agency. In cases where an agency contracts with a taxi provider to perform ADA service using dedicated vehicles, the portion with the dedicated vehicles would be reported as DRPT, and the portion using the non-dedicated vehicles would be reported as DRTX. As a quick reminder for the 2020 report year, pilot programs are not considered public transit and should not be reported to the NTD. Public transit must be regular and continuing to be reportable to the NTD, and therefore pilot programs and any ad hoc services do not qualify as they are not regular and continuing. For any state DOTs with self-reporting subrecipients, there's a new change in the user management process for the 2020 report year. State DOT users are now the user managers for the subrecipient users. Previously, each subrecipient with self-reporting privileges would have their own user managers. This was removed over the summer, and the user manager privileges now fall to the state DOT. The state DOT will be able to create and remove subrecipients' accounts as needed. The user manager duties also include responding to unlock requests and user recertification. Now we will jump into a review of NTD fundamentals, where we will cover modes, types of service, revenue service definitions, and an overview of financial information. When reporting to the NTD, the service must be public. Once that is determined, the mode comes next. Here on the slide are the two most common modes in the rural module, demand response and bus. Bus service is powered by a motor and fuel contained within a vehicle. It includes those that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed route service. Demand response, on the other hand, is service that is defined as service scheduled in response to calls from passengers, like a dial-a-ride service. Another popular mode in the NTD for the rural module is the commuter bus mode. We receive many questions on what is considered commuter bus versus regular bus service. To clarify, commuter bus operates with more than 5 miles of closed-door service, and the same types of vehicles are consistently operated on that service. If you think you have both bus and commuter service, please keep in mind that the vehicles shouldn't be used between the services on the same day, and this also applies for the driver's work assignments, which are typically separate. If you are currently reporting both commuter bus and bus service, and you believe that you may only need to be reporting one mode, please contact your analyst for assistance, and we can help you determine how it should be reported and provide steps on how you can change this in the reporting system if appropriate. The next topic we'll cover is types of service. Currently in the NTD, There we go, sorry about that. Currently in the NTD, there are two main types of service, directly operated and purchased transportation. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's employees. Purchased transportation is when the vehicles are operated by the seller's employees and the service is branded as the buyer. And lastly, the buyer is paying the full cost of service. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, there are two new types of service for the PT or purchased transportation category. We have TX for services operated by a taxi provider and TN for services that are operated by a transportation network company or TNC. If the service is operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi provider nor a TNC, the type of service would remain PT or purchased transportation. After the mode and type of service are determined, the next question is what data should you be collecting for these services? Here on the slide are some data points as well as the abbreviations that are used throughout this presentation and on the report. These data points are collected on a per mode and type of service basis, except for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected for demand response mode types. These are the common acronyms that you will see throughout this presentation, as well as the NTD materials. We will first cover vehicle revenue miles, or VRM, and vehicle revenue hours, or VRH. We will talk a lot about revenue service. So what does that mean? Revenue service is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or are able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, and vehicle maintenance. As mentioned on the previous slide, deadhead is not reported in your revenue service. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility, changing routes, or when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. There are detailed tables found within the NTD policy manual which provide further examples of what is and is not considered revenue service. We will review these in a couple of the next slides. Okay, so here on the slide is an example for the demand response mode of what is and is not considered revenue service. Please note again that the time and miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage to pick up a passenger are not considered revenue service until they reach the pickup point. On the end of that example, the time and miles from the last drop-off back to the dispatching point is also not considered revenue service. As a follow-up to that slide, we have one here for motor bus. So this is what is and is not considered revenue service for MB or motor bus mode. Again, from the garage to the first stop of the route is not considered revenue service, and from the last drop-off point or last stop back to the garage is also not revenue service. Both of these tables on the last slides can be found in the policy manual, and that may be helpful to pass along to your subrecipients if they have questions as to what to report for revenue service. And this is just a general note. This presentation will be recorded as well, so you should be able to access this after the fact as well if you ever want to go back and look at all of these details. Unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, should represent the number of passenger boardings during the reporting period. Passengers are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. The passengers are usually classified as regular or sponsored. When reporting UPT on the RR20 form, this should be the total number of passenger trips, both regular and sponsored. For demand response modes, you will then report sponsored trips as a subset of the total. So sponsored trips are trips that are paid in part or in full by a third party. These may be part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Some common sponsors are the VA, Medicare, or assisted living centers in your area. As mentioned on the last slide, sponsored unlinked passenger trips should be reported as a subset of the total unlinked passenger trips for all demand response modes. Vehicles operated in annual maximum service, or VOMs, are the number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMs are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day, but you will want to ensure that you exclude any atypical days or special events. This count should include any volunteer vehicles that were used during maximum service. This won't be the amount of active vehicles your agency has in service, but rather how many vehicles are used at once during your peak service. Another important definition and fundamental of NTD is accrual accounting. NTD reporting requirements for financial data follow the generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and accrual accounting. If there are conflicts between GAAP and NTD reporting instructions and requirements, for NTD, the NTD rules are to be followed. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when payment is received, and expenses are recorded when the liability incurs, regardless of when the payment is made. Please see the examples here on the slide, and also in the policy manual, we have some more detailed examples as well. Next, we will review the types of expenses that you report on your NTD report. So first is going to be our operating expenses. Operating expenses are going to be your day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for operating and maintaining vehicles, maintaining other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as the examples here on the slide. The other type of expense is going to be your capital expenses. So those are going to be related to the purchase of equipment. Equipment means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. The equipment will have an acquisition cost, which equals the lesser of the capitalization level either established by the government unit for financial statement purposes or $5,000 as determined by FTA. So it'll be the lesser of those two. The last type of expense we're going to cover is capital assistance spent on operations. This is when capital funding is spent on activities that are normally considered operating, such as preventative maintenance or the purchase of tires. Please make sure to break this out on your from your other operating funding on the RR20 form, as these typically have different match percentages. There's a separate field for this on your RR20 form for certain funding sources, such as 5311. For operating expenses, if your agency has more than 2 modes, the operating cost will be broken out between the modes based on direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses between the modes may be calculated based on a cost allocation method between the 2 modes. Please note that that allocation is only acceptable for shared expenses. There should be some expenses that are direct to each mode that you can pull out. When reporting your data to the NTD, you'll want to report the funding that you spent, not the funding that was awarded. So here on the slide is an example. If your agency was awarded $275,000, but you only expended $178,000 of that, you would report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000 that was awarded on your NTD report. So we want to see the funds expended, not exactly what was awarded. Okay, so switching gears from the financial information over to the TAM, or Transit Asset Management information. So this is an overview of the TAM rule, and the TAM rule states that those that receive Chapter 53 funds and either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in the provision of public transportation services are required to report data on their assets to the NTD. There are some exceptions to this. So for recipients of Chapter 5310 B1D funds, if they are not providing public transit services and are providing only client-specific services, they are not required to report under the TAM rule. With regards to how the data is reported, for those that are in the sponsored state DOT plan, you will report the assets associated with the plan on the individual subrecipient packages. However, your targets and your narrative report for your TAM plan information will come from the state DOT forms that are specific to the state's package. Okay, so here's the TAM phase and schedule. This slide might look a little familiar as we've gone over it a couple of years now. So now we're on to RY 2020. So with that being report your 2020, at least 75% of the applicable condition assessments should be reported this year, and your narrative report must be submitted again with this year's report. That will be submitted through the A90 form. Your state may have Tier 2 participants as part of your plan, and these will mostly consist of 5311, 5310, and small urban providers. You will report data on behalf of your managed participants, such as your 5311 and 5310 asset-only providers, while your urban direct reporters will submit their own asset data on their report. This data will be pulled into the metrics on your A90 form, and you as a state DOT will be able to view their asset forms but not edit them. Data submission will work as it has previously, with the state submitting one report on behalf of all of its managed participants and subrecipients. With regards to asset reporting, we will mention capital responsibility multiple times throughout this presentation. Please see the list here to determine whether or not an agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. This is typically a reporting criteria for some of the new asset forms. As a note for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean that an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. On the flip side of that, in addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work does not necessarily indicate direct capital responsibility either. So if you have questions about that, you can always talk to your analyst if you're unsure of whether or not something is reportable. As I mentioned on the phase-in schedule slide, the narrative report was due last year for the first time in report year 2019 and is now due every year moving forward for each agency that's submitting a TAM plan. This would either be states that are the group plan sponsors, or it may be individual agencies that completed their own TAM plan. The narrative report may include any changes in the transit system that may affect progress towards their targets and how they determine the targets. This narrative report document will be uploaded to the A90 form towards the bottom. Please see on this slide a list of the key reference documents for the NTD report. Included are some things such as the glossary, the annual reporting user guide, as well as the uniform system of accounts that was updated 2 years ago in 2018. There are additional resources related to COVID-19 and transit asset management reporting as well on the page that's linked here at the bottom. Next, we'll review the NTD interface and account user management. The NTD homepage is found at www.transit.dot.gov/NTD. This is where the data products for the NTD, policy manuals, and also a clickable link to the reporting system are housed. After logging into the NTD reporting system and following the login steps, which I'll go over in just a moment, all users will land on a new homepage. The Appian platform, which houses NTD and TRAMS, recently deployed a new landing page. So this will look a little bit different than it has in years past. Here on this page, you will select NTD in order to access your report. If you would like to automatically be directed to the NTD portion of the site every time you log in, you can click on the star icon at the top right of the NTD box, and that will save your preference every time you log in. It will just skip this step and move you right to the NTD site. The new NTD home page now allows you to access your NTD report directly from the home page. You will no longer see the news feed when you log in as you have in previous years, and you no longer have to navigate to the records tab. So you will just be able to access your report and your profile straight from this home tab. So we'll review that in the next couple slides. The tasks tab, it will remain mostly the same. The layout will look a little bit different than it has in years past, but it will still house all of your important tasks such as the report year kickoff, incomplete forms, or incomplete submissions. To access your report packages, you want to ensure that you're on that home page, so that tab that's all the way to the top left. From here, you can select the annual tab, and it will populate any open NTD reports for your agency. You'll see the state DOT package as well as the individual subrecipient packages. You can access the forms one of two ways. You can either click on the NTD ID with the folder icon that's shown here all the way on the left, and this will direct you to the report package summary page. So that page will look familiar to you as it has in the past. That's how you can access your list of your subrecipients, and it will also allow you to access related actions for the package, such as submitting or other actions you may need to take. If you would only like to edit the forms and just go directly to a form to start entering data, you can click on the pencil icon all the way to the right side of the page, and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms to edit. To access your reporter profile, you again will want to ensure that you're on the home page or the home tab up at the top left. And instead of clicking on annual, you're going to select profile, and a list of your agency profiles will load in the table below. The profile is where you can edit your modes, basic information for the agencies, as well as view other users from your agency. These are the forms that typically don't change year to year, and that's why they're housed on the profile versus the package. To view the individual forms, you can click on the pencil icon on the right side of the page, and that will allow you access to the P10, P20, etc. To access the other profile options, you can click on the NTD ID folder icon on the left side of the page. Once you click on that NTD ID folder icon on the left, you will see the profile summary page as you have in previous years. From here, you can go through related actions to edit the P forms. Next is the e-file library. So this is where you can filter through communications from previous report years as well as the current report year. You may review closeout letters as well through the e-file library. Oops, we went back a couple slides. Sorry about that. Okay, so here was the e-file library slide. I'll just leave that up for a couple seconds. So like I said, this is where you can access your communications as well as your closeout letters from previous years. Okay, so another thing you can access through the profile is the form library. So this is where you can access data from the previous years that you've submitted through to the NTD. So this will include forms where you can drop down to select the package that you'd like to view, and then the blue links will populate in the table below, and you can click on whichever form you would like to view for whichever subrecipient. When you click on that link, it will download the form in an HTML format. In addition to viewing the forms, under the Related Actions tab of the profile, you will also be able to print previous year's report packages in full rather than form by form. Some other actions you can complete under this Related Actions tab is going to be viewing and editing those profile forms I've mentioned. So the P10 is going to be your basic information, the P20 is going to be your mode information, and then your P30 is going to be your reporting users. So that's going to be any users associated with this profile that you're looking at. If you do choose to print your annual package as a whole, you'll be taken to a new page where you will click on the refresh button until the link comes up for you to download the file. So this may take a while as it generates the HTML file for you to download. Once you click on the refresh button and the file is ready, it will redirect you to the previous page, and here on the slide, right where the red arrow is, that is where the downloadable link will appear after it populates from the system. And once you click on that, you can download that to view all of the forms in one file. Okay, so lastly, we're going to cover users and user management. To access the system, you first need to be a user. To add users to the system, each agency must have a designated user manager. User manager may edit and add other users, and they also may fill some roles, NTD roles, such as NTD contact or CEO. The most important users to have on your account in NTD will be the CEO user and the NTD contact user. The CEO is typically the director or CEO of the agency and will be the one submitting the original submission of the NTD report. The NTD contact will be the main point of contact for the analyst to reach out to with any questions. After the original submission of the report, the NTD contact may submit any subsequent revisions that the report may need. Agencies may have unlimited numbers of editors and viewers, but there can only be one CEO and one NTD contact user. To reset your password, you will go to the reporting homepage and click on the Forgot Password link. Then you will fill out your username, which will be your full email address, all lowercase. You will receive an email with a link that is only active for 15 minutes. Once you click that link, you will be able to reset your password by following the steps in that email. If you're already a user in the system and need to unlock your account, there are two different ways to complete this. You can either unlock your own account if you have set up security questions, which we'll review in the next slide, or you can submit an unlock request. If you submit an unlock request, the request will go to the user managers on your agency's profile. If you are a user manager, it will go to either another user manager if you have one, or it will go to the NTD team for processing. It's important to note that even when you are locked out of the NTD due to inactivity, you can still log into the NTD system. However, all of your reports will just be unavailable to you until you are unlocked using either your security questions or you request to be unlocked. So as mentioned, if you have set up your security questions beforehand, you will be able to unlock yourself by answering those. To set up your questions, if you haven't already, you can go to the top right-hand corner of your screen after logging into the NTD system and select Profile, and then Related Actions, and then there will be an option to manage your security questions. From there, you should be able to follow the steps to set them up and select your questions. Lastly, I'd like to go over what self-reporting means for subrecipients. If you grant access to your subrecipients for self-reporting, they will have the ability to edit and save their data as well as respond to validation. Self-reporting is completely optional, and when this access is granted, the subrecipient will continue to reach out to the state DOT for any technical assistance. If the state then has additional questions, they will reach out to their assigned NTD analyst for assistance that we can help you with. If you choose for your subrecipients to be self-reporting, you will need to ensure that you create user accounts for them to access the system. As mentioned previously, and a change for 2020, all user management for self-reporting subrecipients are now handled by the state DOT contacts. Please keep in mind that all correspondence should go through the state DOT users before the NTD analyst, so that way everybody is kept on the same page. Now we're going to jump into this first step of reporting, the report year kickoff. The report year kickoff is there for states to set up their reporting packages for the year that they're currently reporting in. So this year you would be completing your report year 2020 kickoff. To start this process, the CEO delegate, if you have one, and the NTD contact will have access to this task after the state's fiscal year has ended. So for anyone with a June 30th end date for your fiscal year, you should have this task available to you. And then moving forward, our next upcoming October 1st for any federal fiscal year end dates, you guys should receive those tasks beginning October 1st and then, January 1st for our calendar year fiscal years. So once that's available to you, you will select the task from the task menu, click accept, and then proceed to start the process. The first step is to verify the DOT users. You can review this information, and if you need to make any changes, you can ask your user manager to update, add people, remove people as needed once the kickoff has been completed. As a note, only user managers can add or remove user accounts. After clicking continue on the previous page, you will next identify your subrecipients. You will be able to review the list from your 2019 report and either add or remove subrecipients as needed. If they're previous reporters that you need to add, or urban or tribal reporters, you can search for them and add them to the grid of subrecipients. If you search for them, you will need to click on the search button to get it to actually launch into searching the key terms that you've typed in. Please keep in mind that the search is automatically contained within your state. But if you have an address that's outside of the state, for example, a common one is Greyhound, then you will want to make sure you open up those state parameters from the drop-down menu to all states. If you know the state for the subrecipient you're searching for, you can also select that from the drop-down menu. If you're adding a brand new reporter to the NTD as a subrecipient, you will input their information at the bottom of the page. You will need to enter the reporter name and the state, if nothing else. The address lines do help the analyst when reviewing the new ID request, so we do suggest that you enter the address if you have it. If you don't have the information when you kick off, you can add or remove subrecipients after the kickoff through the state's packages. Once you've added or removed any subrecipients as needed, you'll then assign the subrecipient type. The type for existing subrecipients is preloaded with information from the past report year. If you have any new subrecipients, you'll need to select what type they are from the drop-down menu. These types are Rural General Public Transit Service, Asset-Only Reporters, Urban or Tribal Reporters, and Inner-City Bus. If you need to change the type of subrecipient that an agency was in the prior report year, we recommend that you reach out to your analyst before you make any changes, just so that your analyst is aware and can anticipate that change. After choosing the subrecipient type, you will review which of the subrecipients are participants in the state's TAM plan. Urban tribal subrecipients are not selectable from the state's package, as they will select the state, if applicable, during their own kickoff. Inner city bus subrecipients are also not part of the TAM program and won't be included in this section. The state will be able to choose whether or not rural general public transit types are in the TAM plan, while the asset-only subrecipients will automatically be chosen as participants. After clicking continue on the previous page, you will be able to select which of your subrecipients will report their own data. This may be all, some, or none of your subrecipients. As mentioned before, this is optional. These designations do not carry over year to year, so if you don't select anybody for self-reporting privileges during your kickoff and this section is left blank, it will indicate that they are not self-reporting. So that's just a note. This is something that needs to be done every year if you'd like your subrecipients to have those self-reporting privileges. Okay, so the last step is clicking continue and then OK. So once you click that OK button, you'll then be notified that your report is being kicked off and your forms are generating. This can take some time as the packages are populating one by one, so please be patient if you don't see the forms right away. It does take some time for the system to generate those, especially if you have a lot of subrecipients. Any new subrecipients that you created during the kickoff will produce a task for the analyst to review, and they will not show up immediately in your package. Your analyst might reach out upon receiving that task for more information on the new subrecipient if you haven't already talked about it with them beforehand. Once your kickoff is complete and your forms has generated, it's time to get into the packages to fill out the data. The NTD will launch the 2020 report year this upcoming Monday, September 14th, unless you're otherwise notified, and that will be for our October reporters. The forms will become available at that time, and your analyst will reach out with some welcome information. We are currently looking for a couple of agencies this week to pilot the report year launch and ensure that the system is working as expected. If you're interested in piloting and taking a look at your forms a little bit early, please reach out to your assigned analyst. You can find your analyst information on your reporter profile if you're unsure who your assigned analyst is. If you still can't find it from there, you can always contact the help desk and we can help you figure out who your assigned analyst is for your particular agency. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Eric, and he's going to walk you through the NTD report package forms.
All right, thanks, Melissa. I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. We're going to be going over how to complete the 2020 annual report.
Looks good.
All right, so the main type of subrecipient we have is the RGPT, Rural General Public Transit Subrecipient. And this is typed for an agency that provides rural service and benefits from 5311 funding or is reporting through the useful life of a 5311 funded asset. This standard RGPT reporter will have about 6 forms to complete as are listed here. The next type is the asset only. This reporter type benefits from funding that is not 5311 or 5307 and owns, manages, or operates assets funded by FTA that are used in public transit. One example of this would be a 5310 provider that operates public transit. And these reporters will have a smaller package of forms compared to the RGPT, and these will include a B10 identification form along with the 3 asset forms, the A15, the A30, and the A35. Next is the intercity bus subrecipient. These are providers that schedule bus service to the general public that operate with limited stops between 2 urbanized areas, connect a rural area to an urbanized area, or has a capacity to transport luggage. And these 2 will have an abbreviated report that includes the B10 information and an abbreviated RR20 that includes 5311 funds expended, vehicle revenue miles, and unlinked passenger trips. So please also note that these VRM and UPT numbers should be when providing 5311 services. So if a route is only partially funded by the 5311 program, report all the miles and ridership for that route. Lastly is the urban tribal subrecipient. This can either be an urban reporter that directly reports to NTD already that provides urban service or benefits from 5307, or secondly, they can be an American Indian tribe that performs rural service who also direct to NTD or who also directly report to NTD. Since these agencies already directly report to NTD, the state submits an abbreviated report that includes their B10 information and the amount of 5311. So please exclude the tribal transit funds from this tribal subrecipient report. So the first step in working on the report is getting to the package by selecting the NTD ID of the package you want to edit, whether that be your state package or an individual subrecipient package. You can also search the NTD ID of the agency, or you can search the name of the agency to bring that up. By selecting your state package, you can work on your state forms, or you can view all of your subrecipient packages. So to work on a subrecipient, you'll want to select the Subrecipient Reports tab to view all the subrecipient reports you have, and you can filter these based on any of the headings here. Some of the more likely ones to do is the type of subrecipient or the amount of open issues remaining, so you can see how many open issues you have left. So to get to the forms to actually edit, you'll want to go up to the annual forms at the top right beside view issues. And then it'll bring you to a new page where you're then able to select each form to go in there and make the edits. So the first form we're going to be talking about is the basic B10 information form, which contains just the organization type and fiscal year. So once you open that up, you'll be able to edit the data from this page using the drop-down to select the organization type. And additionally, just remember to enter the fiscal year end date of which the data is being reported on. And when you're done with those two items, you can then save and validate and close the form from there. Next up is the A10 Stations and Maintenance Facilities form. The A10 captures the type and number of maintenance facilities used for public transit and are reported based on the capacity and ownership types of those maintenance facilities. The definition of a maintenance facility is a garage or building where mechanics perform routine maintenance and repairs and typically service as operating garages. Also note that we will not include bus barns in this count or any sort of third-party facility where you would take your vehicle to go get worked on. If one facility is shared by two or more modes, you'll want to report a prorated share between the modes involved. This could be based on any point that is reflective of how much of the facility is used per mode, but one of the more common approaches is based on the number of vehicles it services. For example, an agency owns one facility, and that agency operates a demand response and a fixed route bus service. So both modes share the facility, and the agency owns 20 total vehicles. The demand response mode runs 15 vehicles, and the fixed route bus mode runs 5. So in this example, we would expect to see 0.75 reported for demand response and 0.25 for the fixed route bus. Just please make sure also when you have multiple facilities with multiple modes that the total number of facilities you report between all A10 forms equals a whole number. Next, we're going to go through the A15 facilities inventory. The A15 form collects basic information on the facilities that are used to supply the public transit service. So if your agency does not have any facility, so none is reported in the A10 and none is reported here, the form will just be saved and validated as blank to indicate that. And on this form, you report any admin and maintenance facilities for which you have capital responsibility for, and you report passenger and parking facilities regardless of your capital responsibility. Examples of the types of facilities reported are administrative buildings, maintenance facilities, or a combined administrative maintenance facility. So with that being said, if your agency owns a maintenance facility on the A10 form, we would likely expect to have that facility entered on this form. And if not, it's probably be brought up during validation, or you can further discuss with your analyst. So to fill out the A15, you'll first click on the Add New, and then you will click on the Add Facility link that you can see by the arrow shown here. This will allow you to enter the data for the facility. You will complete 3 sections that require information in regards to the facility information, like the mode it services, the type of facility it is, the year it was built, square footage, etc., the condition assessment of the facility, and the address of the facility. The A30 form, or the revenue vehicle inventory form, is where we're going to report all the revenue vehicle inventory data categorized in fleets. If you completed this form last year, the 2019 data will pre-populate, and you will only need to report new fleets or edit existing fleets. And you can enter new fleets by clicking Add New Fleet, or you can edit an existing fleet by clicking Edit Existing Fleet. While adding a new fleet, you will fill out all required information. The vehicle type will be what the vehicle is, for example, a cutaway, a van, automobile. The total vehicles will state how many total vehicles there are in the fleet that exactly match in all ways. The active fleet vehicles are how many vehicles are active of the last day of the fiscal year that you're reporting on. The next important point is the no capital responsibility field to the right-hand side of the picture here. The field is only checked if you do not have any capital replacement responsibility for the vehicle. So checking off this box will remove the requirement for reporting a useful life benchmark for this fleet, and it will remove it from the performance of the A90 form. One common question we do receive during the year is the difference between an active and inactive vehicle. Transit agencies will report the number of active vehicles in the fleet at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, so we took a little break. We're back.
Are you guys seeing my screen now?
Yes, everything looks back to normal now as it was.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. So I'll just go back over the active and inactive fleet vehicles. Okay, so active and inactive vehicles. So following up on their previous slide about the A30 form here, active vehicles provide regular service and include spare vehicles. So that leaves us with inactive vehicles being in storage or a part of an FTA emergency contingency plan, awaiting to be sold or disposed of, or out for long-term major repairs. So with that being said, kind of following up on active and inactive, we'll just want to remember to retire fleets that are no longer in service rather than deleting them. And fleets should only be deleted if they were added to the mode incorrectly. So to retire a fleet, you will update active fleet vehicles to 0. And once that's done, you will answer the question yes to is this fleet retired. Next is the service vehicle inventory form, where we collect an inventory of service vehicles used to indirectly deliver transit service. So agencies are required to report on fleets for which they have capital responsibility, and these service vehicles include cars used for admin staff, transit police cars, and tow trucks. However, agencies should not report small forklifts and golf carts. And this form will work the same way as the A15. So to create a fleet, you will select Add New. And as we mentioned prior, this is where we collect service vehicles that indirectly deliver transit service. So any revenue vehicles that actually perform transit service and transport passengers should be reported to the A30 rather than here. And if your agency does not have any service vehicles, we'll just save and validate this form blank to indicate that. So the first section is the service fleet information, and it includes the fleet name, the ID associated with the vehicle, and the corresponding information pieces for the fleet. And the three types of these are automobiles, truck and other rubber tire vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. And if your agency has more than one mode, we'll just have the primary mode be the mode that the fleet's vehicle services the most. The second and final section of the A35 is the financial area. The fleet name and ID will carry over from the first section, and then the agency will fill out the transit agency capital responsibility, the estimated cost, and the year dollars of estimated cost. The estimated cost will be the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the asset. So if you do not have a recent estimate, you can report the original cost of the asset or the insured value. If you do not have a recent estimate and do not know the insured value, you can report the original cost of the asset, and then you report the year that the asset was then purchased. So lastly, we're on to the RR20 form, which is the largest form in the report and is also the last form in the report. When you open the RR20 form, the total fund expended is at the top of the form, which is the non-editable running total of the funding you're entering. This should match the total fund expended by mode and type of service that you manually enter, which is shown here by the red circles. And as a reminder, finances should be reported as revenues that were expended during the fiscal year, not just earned. Agencies with more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service and not allocate their total expenses. I know we touched on this earlier, but kind of dig down a little bit deeper. If you do have one mode, you want to determine which expenses are direct and can easily be traced to a specific mode. And this could include driver wages or some sort of vehicle repair costs. And for the remaining expenses that are joint, which are incurred for the benefit of both modes or all modes that you all operate, you can allocate these remaining costs. An example of a cost that may be allocated would be a transit manager's salary that supports all modes that are serviced by your agency. So you may be able to allocate these by an allocation factor that are listed here by revenue miles, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue hours, or the number of employees. The next section, report fare revenues. And these fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers, including donations made aboard the vehicle. The fare revenue are further broken down between passenger paid fares and organization paid fares. And these passenger paid fares are those that have traditionally been considered as passenger fare, where the person pays to come aboard the vehicle themselves. Next, we have organization paid fares, which are those that an organization pays for or pays through a third party rather than the passenger paying themselves. One example would be a university paying an agency to allow students to ride fare free. And as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, that Medicaid funds will be reported here for the first time this year. Much like expenses, if you have more than one mode, that the fare revenues will need to be broken out as well. There are some exceptions to the rule that are listed here. So if this is an example of your agency's fare, the way the fares are determined for your agency, you'll just want to make sure that your analyst is aware, and you can discuss further through validation so we can note it for the current year and for the future years. Going in order of the form, here are some examples of other directly generated funds. In addition, this is where the donations and insurance recoveries will be reported, along with any non-full cost contracts. Revenues accrued through a PT agreement will be reported if you receive revenues from another agency that pays for the full cost of a service, as long as it meets the NTD definition of purchase transportation. If you do happen to report this here, your analyst will just further discuss this situation with you just to determine if this is a correct field for the funds to be reported. Below that section, it comes to the non-federal funding section. You will enter the data accordingly based on what funds came from local sources, state sources, and other non-federal sources. The local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. The state sources include state programs that support public transit, but do not include Chapter 53 funds that a state may pass through to a subrecipient. And if you happen to report other funds, you'll just want to add a description of those types of funds below once you insert that number. The next section, you will select all applicable federal funding sources from this list of programs. For 5311 funds passed through from the state, please select formula grants for rural areas as shown in the picture here, and you will report those to the formula grants for rural areas box to the right-hand side of the screen. If you do happen to select an other field, you will be required to place a comment to describe the type of funding that you're reporting. Some examples of other funds are listed here. So for other FTA funds can include any source that isn't already listed, which could be Section 5308. Another example of other federal funds could be HUD or any non-FTA federal source. And other US DOT funds will include funds from the Federal Highway Administration. After the financial section, you will then enter all the resource information, which includes volunteer drivers and personal vehicles used in service. One common error is to leave those fields and the safety fields for reportable incidents, fatalities, and injuries blank. So if you don't have any of these instances, you'll just report zeros. But one common issue we do see is that users will just leave them blank because there are none. And when they go to submit the report, there'll be an error saying that you need to insert information for these fields. So just a reminder to enter zeros if there are none. For service data, the miles and hours reported should only include revenue service as mentioned previously in the presentation here. And that's just as a reminder when vehicles are transporting passengers or able to transport passengers. That also includes layover and recovery time, but does not include any deadhead, driver training time, or vehicle maintenance time driving to get the vehicle worked on. And lastly on this, when reporting unlinked passenger trips, passengers should be counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. And that total UPT should equal regular UPT plus sponsored UPT. After completing the revenue service section, the safety data is the last item on the RR20 form. Reportable incidents include fatalities, injuries, or property damage that exceeds 25 grand, collisions involving revenue vehicles that require towing away from the scene for any vehicle involved, or an evacuation for a life safety reason. Fatalities are reported when a death occurs within 30 days of the incident, caused by the incident, and injuries are reported when a passenger is immediately transported away from the scene for medical attention. So that wraps up the subrecipient forms, but now we're going to go into the state forms here. The first one of the two is the RU30, which is found under the state package that deals with the statewide characteristics. As you can see by the red boxes, there are two data points that are needed to be filled in: the 5311 expended on state admin and the number of counties with 5311 service. As you will see that the number of counties statewide does not have a red box, as this will be automatically populated. The amount of 5311 expended on state admin is the amount of 5311 funding that the state spent on administering the program, and the number of counties with 5311 service is the total number of counties served in whole or in part by a 5311 operator. Please note that this should include counties served by tribes that receive 5311, regardless if it's from the state. The second form is the A90 performance measure targets if the state is a group TAM plan sponsor. The A90 is where you report the targets for the portions of the assets that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark. This will show your target reported last year, the current performance that is pulled from the current year asset forms, and a place for you to report your target. Only the group plan sponsors will report this form, and sub-packages have a viewable version of this form, but they cannot edit the form at all, they can only view. The first section deals with rolling stock. So with this, NA should be selected in a case where there are no vehicles reported of that type, while you should have a target reported for those vehicles that you have a performance for. The second section contains the equipment targets. This is based on 3 vehicle types reported in the A35 form of automobile, truck and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. And this section will be filled out the same way as the first, so if you don't have any assets of these kind, you'll just select NA. The third section contains the facility targets. You will report the percentage for the number of facilities that rate at a 3 or below on the scale. Lastly, you will upload your narrative report at the bottom like last year, as this is a yearly requirement. And this will outline the targets your agency set in the form, the progress towards those targets, and any changes within the transit system. So after you've completed the reports for all the subrecipients and your 2 state forms, you will then need to submit the report within the system. You will do this by clicking related actions from the state's report package summary page. So please note that only the CEO or CO delegate can submit the first submission of the report, and then the NTD contact can also submit subsequent submissions. So CEO, CO delegate, and NTD contact can submit anything after the first. So when you're in related actions, as you see here, you're going to select the submit annual report package. So if there are any open issues, non-saved forms, or missing required data points, you will not actually be able to submit the report. You'll want to go to the subrecipients package and complete any of these items to resolve those issues. So once you have that completed and there are no issues preventing you from submitting, this page here will appear and you will click continue. The next page will bring you to a screen where you can submit. And then after submitting the report package, you will see a box stating that the action was completed successfully. In addition, if you just want to confirm that the report package was completed successfully, you can refer back to the state's report package summary page, and you'll see that the report should be listed as in review rather than working data. Okay, so next we're going to be going through some common reporting challenges faced during the annual report. Every year there are some different challenges faced through the report year. These mainly include understanding the NTD policies, completing the data entry correctly, the completeness of the entire report, and reviewing the validation issues. One of the main challenges stems from the validation that analysts send the report back for. This occurs when analysts have questions about the data that was submitted. The validation includes but is not limited to time series checks against your prior year information, logic checks between items that are reported on different forms of the report, and checking for values outside the range for agencies that have similar characteristics. And agencies can either revise the data to reflect correct information or they can provide a sufficient explanation for the questions that are being asked by their analyst. One issue we mentioned before in the presentation just deals with the allocation of operating expenses, which is common. The agencies should report expenses by mode and type of service, and you'll want to determine which expenses are direct and can be traced to a mode and which expenses are shared to then allocate. Another one we see is in regards to the year-to-year funding changes and making sure the funding sources used for public transit are reported to the correct lines on the RR20. We just want to make sure that all funds used to provide public transit are reported. As mentioned before as well, agencies should only report service data for when they are performing revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead, therefore deadhead should not be included into the data that's reported. So we want to make sure to remove that deadhead so we can have an accurate performance indicator like revenue speed and cost per mile an hour reported, compared to if we did have deadhead reported, it would throw that off to what it would actually be. VOMs, or vehicles operated in annual maximum service, refer to the number of vehicles or number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. This includes volunteer vehicles during peak time and excludes any atypical days or one-time events. This is not the total amount of vehicles that are available to perform service, but the max number of vehicles that are used simultaneously. One issue we do see with VOMs is that an agency reports 100% of the active vehicles from the A30 form. So for example, if you had 20 active vehicles on the A30 form and you reported 20 VOMs, it can be correct, but we may ask you about it in validation to confirm. So that's one thing you may see about VOMs there. Proceeding along, when reporting a new vehicle, it is typical that an agency will report the corresponding capital expense on the RR20. And capital expenses are related to purchasing a capital asset, like a vehicle, or making an improvement to a capital asset that increases its value or useful life. The expense should include the acquisition cost, the cost of delivery, installation, and any modifications to the asset. One issue we see with agencies that they will report the new vehicle or the capital expense, but not both. It may be the case where you don't have to report both, but we'll just ask about that in validation. And then additionally, just note that when you do add a vehicle and you do report the capital expense for it, and the vehicle is used for more than one mode, we'll just want to report the expense to the mode that the vehicle is used most, versus allocating the cost between the two modes. All agencies must report the vehicles that are used to provide public transit on their A30 form that have not been sold or disposed of at the end of the fiscal year. The inventory should essentially be the snapshot of the last day of the fiscal year, and the vehicles must be reported in the fiscal year that they become available for service. So at any time, if you have a question about this, just reach out to your analyst. We should be able to work with you on that. When completing the A90 form, you must report the next fiscal year performance targets for the assets you have capital responsibility for. The report will not be complete if there is not a target for an asset class that you have a performance for. Some common issues regarding this is reporting the current year target instead of the next year's target, and not reporting a realistic target percentage. And what I mean by that is, for example, reporting a target of, let's say 38% when you have two maintenance facilities. So we would ask more about that because it would likely be a 0%, 50%, or 100%. So if you have something like that, we'll just make sure to ask you about that and we can work through it during validation. As a reminder, DOTs submit data on public transit operations of subrecipients who are awarded federal program funds, and it can be any of the 4 that we listed earlier. And if you have any questions about what type of sub should be, just let us know and we'll get that situated accordingly. So once we have the report submitted, there's just a couple more steps that need to be taken in order to completely close out the report for the year. Your assigned NTD analysts will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They will compare the data submitted this year to the data submitted last year for any significant changes, as well as ensure that the data was reported to the correct field. If there is any data change from year to year, please try to avoid stating generalized responses like the data is correct, as you should be able to explain the change that occurred then you should be able to have an explanation for the change of service so we can then close out the issue, and it will reduce the amount of back and forth for the more context that you do have about that. So once the analyst has gone through the report, they will send it back to the state to resolve any open issues. Each time this happens, the due date timetable is shortened, as there should be fewer issues each time. If you do fail to correct any issues stated from the prior year closeout, they may be marked as questionable in the current year validation. These notes in the closeout letter typically relate to incomplete reports, which can mean either the data does not conform with the NTD definitions, accounting principles, or it can mean that the agency did not adequately respond to the validation issues raised by the analyst. All identified issues must be fully addressed in order for it to be resolved. If either of these issues occur, NTD will cite them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve a validation issue is to provide solid and detailed explanations that give your analyst a clear picture of the service and the changes that occurred. I will explain why the data changed from year to year, or what service changes took place to cause a significant shift in the data. If you do happen to find out that last year's data was reported incorrectly, or just want an explanation as to why it was wrong, what it should have been last year, and why this data is correct this year, so what kind of changed in the data gathering. So just please note that FTA will not accept this 2 consecutive years. So we just want to make sure we get that situated in the year that we find that out. So that wraps everything up, and here's the contact information for the help desk as well as our team. And now I believe we'll just open it up for any other questions that aren't already answered through the chat pod.
As a reminder, I see some of the questions are coming in the chat box. So we'll monitor that, and also you can type it in the Q&A box. I think Melissa answered Paula's question. So the latest question, well, actually, no, Paula's was answered. This one says, we expect great data deviations this year from last year due to COVID-related reduction in passenger trips, not chips. Will NTD validation take this into consideration?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take that one. And also for Paula, I said this in the chat pod, but when I got kicked off around the same time as Eric, I lost her question. So Paula, if you have any other questions, let us know with our contact information here, and we'll help you out. So in response to this question about services or reduction in service due to COVID, yes, the NTD validation checks or validation issues are going to be adjusted to account for decreases in service due to COVID-19 to help take down the number of validation issues that you need to respond to. So in the case that a validation issue still fires on your report, you should just include any information you have from that subrecipient about how long they either stopped providing services or how long they were doing reduced services. But overall, yes, you should see a decrease in the number of validation issues as FTA has gone in and adjusted the validation to accommodate those decreases we are going to see for all agencies.
I guess if there's no other questions coming in, you have the contact information that also appears on the handouts. I can paste that info one last time for everybody just in case. It's probably a good idea. Stick that in the...
Yeah, they can always contact Eric or I. Bailey is also on the rural team. And then you can always contact the help desk if for some reason you can't find our contact information, and we'll try to put you in touch with your analyst.
That's great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for participating. A special thank you to Melissa and Eric for your very informative, as always, presentation. Thank you to all the attendees for your patience with our little technical glitch. These things happen. As a reminder, you should be getting an invitation to fill out a survey evaluation about this session. Please take just a couple minutes, fill that out. We really appreciate your feedback. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Be well. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Lori.
Thanks.
Everyone, have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.